let's look at another type of equation, which is called a high-order polynomial equation. So far, we have a linear equation, which the power of x equals 1. And we have the quadratic equation, the power of x equals 2, right? So now we have another equation which the power of x is more than 1, okay, more than 2. So this is the high order polynomial equation. Of course, the previous example, this one is also a high order polynomial equation. Actually, but we can convert to be a quadratic type equation. So we can use the quadratic formula or factor the method for the quadratic equation to solve this problem. But sometimes you cannot do that. For example, let's look at this one. X cubed equals 81x. Okay. So many students, when they solve this kind of problem, they will always make some mistakes. So the idea, they often, I use the box here, okay? This is wrong steps. They say, okay, let's divide by x on both sides. So you have x squared equals 81, right? Then they say, okay, we use the square property, square root property, so you have x equals plus or minus 9. But we notice that that is wrong, okay? That is the solution, but it will lose, we actually lose some solutions. The reason is why we notice that x equals 0 is the solution, right? However, if you use divided by x, then you have this plus or minus 9. We didn't have x equals 0 at last. So why we call this, why we will lose the solution, this solution x equals 0? The reason is when you divide by x on both sides of this equation, you assume that x is not equal to 0, right? So this will cause the problem, so that this is not the correct way to solve the problem. So now let's look at the correct way. So let's subtract, let's put x terms on one side, so we subtract 81x on both sides. So you have x cubed minus 81x equals 0. Then we factorize it. We noted that you have what? You have the common factor x. You can take the common factor x out. So you have x squared equals minus 81 equals 0. Then you can factorize it inside because this is x squared, or you can just use the square root properties to solve it. So now let's look at this one would be x equals 0 or x squared equals 81. So we know that we can use the square root property x equals plus or minus 9. So you can see now we have 3 roots, right? 0 plus or minus 9. So at last you will have x equals 0, x equals 9, x equals negative 9, right? You have 3 solutions. So keep in mind, don't divide by a variable on both sides for the equations. Otherwise, you will lose some solutions. Another equation which is called the radical equation. The radical equation is the equation that the variable is inside a radical sign. For example, if you have this example, square root ax minus 7 equals 3. For this example, so the idea is we want to get rid of the square root, right? Otherwise, we can do nothing. So we needed to raise both sides to a certain power to eliminate the radical sign. Okay, so here is since this is the square root, we square on both sides to eliminate the square root. Okay, then you squared, you have 8x minus 7 equals 9. So this would be a linear equation, right? We add 7 on both sides, so 8x equals 16, x equals 2. But when you have a radical equation, we need the inside to be a non-negative number, right? Non-negative, which is greater than or equal to 0. So at last, you need to check the solution. How to check it? You just plug in to the equation to see if this one will make some problem. Before we plug in 2, so you see this is the 16 minus 7, which is equal to 9, okay, which is positive, so that is good. So that is our solution. Let's look at another equation. The reason is we want to check the solution. The reason is if we raise some power, sometimes you will produce some extra solutions. Okay, so now let's look at another equation, which is 10 minus 3x equals x. So we needed to raise the power. Let's square it on both sides. So this is 10 minus 3x equals x squared. If we put the x term, all the terms on one side, it becomes x squared. We add 3x, right? Plus 3x. We add 10 and minus 10, subtract 10, equals 0. So we can factorize it. Okay, of course, you can use the quadratic formula. This is x minus 2, x plus 5 equals 0. So you will have x equals 2 and x equals negative 5. But keep in mind, we need to check your solution. Right? If we check the solution, we just plug into the equation, right? We plug it into the equation. We notice that 2 is okay. Check solution. How to check it? If we plug in 2, so this would be 10 minus 3 times 2 equals 2. That is okay. However, if you plug in negative 5, it becomes minus 3 times negative 5. That would be okay, but if equals negative 5, that is not correct because the square root is always non-negative, but this is a negative number, so this is not correct. So in other words, this is not your solution. Your solution is x equals 2. So now let's look at another equation we often have, which is called absolute value equation. So this is the absolute of u equals 0, right? This kind of equation where u could be some expressions about x. Okay, when you have this one, u could be, this is the typical one would be the absolute value of u equals c, where c is greater than equal to 0. Okay, when you solve the absolute value equation, the first thing you need to do is to get rid of the absolute value sign. When you get absolute value sign, you have to give me this kind of form. Then you can do that, because that means this is equivalent to say that u equals c or u equals negative c, right? The reason is, for example, if you have some the absolute value of u equals 2, we know u could be equal to 2 or u equal to what? Negative 2, right? So we use this property, you can solve the equation involving the absolute value. So now let's look at this equation. This is the 4x plus 5, take the absolute value, equals 3. Okay, then we needed to say, okay, so that means 4x, we needed to get rid of the absolute value sign, so it would be 4x plus 5 equals 3, or 4x plus 5 equals negative 3. For the first equation, we subtract 5, so x equals negative 2, so x equals negative 1/2. And for this one, you will have 4x equals negative 8, so x equals negative 2. So actually you have two solutions. So for the many students will have trouble with this kind of equation. Keep in mind, for all the absolute value equation, you need to convert that equation into this form. Then using this property to get rid of the absolute value sign.